companies. PPS has really no way to make its budget bigger unless, and this was mentioned before, unless state lawmakers choose to boost school spending. You saw some graphs in the presentation earlier, but in order to increase spending in one area within our current resources, current spending that's planned for other areas has to be cut. So it is really an issue of trade-offs, really difficult trade-offs, until and unless the pie can get bigger because of additional funding. And that really is a question that we need some support with from our state policymakers in Salem.
Great. So I want to go back to you, Sharon. There's a question here that's getting a lot of likes on our Slido. And it's regarding the state audit in 2019, which, according to this question, stated that PPS spends too much on management and should look to cut there instead of continuing to cut teachers. You just responded to a similar question, but can you just speak to that again?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the timing of that audit, the Secretary of State audit, was a time period that predates the 2018 school year budget. And what we see in our budget over the last 5 years is that over 90% of our resources are spent in our schools.
Great. Dr. Adams, there's a question here about class sizes. So if class sizes cannot be capped, why is PPS unable to hire more teachers?
Well, one of the immediate drivers of how many teachers we hire and have is how many students we have enrolled. And as we've been saying, and you're probably aware, our enrollment is down over 4,000 students since the beginning of the pandemic. And at the same time, we actually have more PAT members in our organization than before. And so it is challenging to hire additional teachers when we don't have the additional funding that is driven by additional students.
So to add to this question, we got here another one about why would you mentioned, I think, sending kids to another school outside of their neighborhood. Why wouldn't you just employ more teachers?
In some buildings, at many buildings, we don't necessarily have the capacity to put another teacher in the space. And so if that were the case, the student would not be able to under a class size cap, that student would not be allowed to attend his, her, or their neighborhood school, and we'd have to find the next closest school. We've seen this, as I mentioned, play out in St. Paul schools.
Great, thank you, Dr. Adams. Superintendent, I'm gonna, there's a question in here I think that you might be able to speak to. There's two questions actually, similar. Why isn't the district lobbying for legislative changes? What is PPS doing to address the overall lack of funding at the state level, knowing that prevents it from offering the pay increases the teachers want and deserve?
That's a great question. What I want to assure our broader community is Portland Public Schools has continued to show up strong in our advocacy for adequate funding for K-12 schools all across the state. We agree with the state legislature when they devised a model for what it takes to provide a quality education. This quality education model has a price tag to it. Unfortunately, state school funding year after year continues to come short of that total amount. And so without the funding necessary to be able to provide the quality and experience for our students, that well-rounded education with all the supports our students deserve, districts up and down the state are in the same predicament that we are. We are trying to operate our school systems under a constrained set of resources. As far as the advocacy, I want to assure our community that we continue to be active in communicating with our local elected officials locally and at the state level, and frankly at the federal level as well, to make sure that they understand the negative impacts that inadequate levels of funding have on schools. Nobody wants to make difficult choices between class size or arts education, science labs or athletic teams. These are the kinds of difficult menu choices we would need to make unless the available total amount of resources increases for a district like Portland Public Schools or any other in the state of Oregon.
Thank you, Dr. Adams, and I appreciate everybody. I'm just looking at all these questions that are coming in real time. There's a question in here. I saw yesterday PPS issued a release that they tried to bargain and PAT walked out. PAT told membership that PPS didn't show up. Can you comment?
Happy to comment. Here are the facts. We began mediation at 9 a.m. in the morning. We were told by the mediator that PAT would have a proposal for us by the middle of the morning. At 3:30 p.m., we were presented by the mediator with PAT's proposal. That presentation took about roughly, let's call it an hour, about 4:45. We then began an immediate response while PAT was in contact with the mediator via text message. We finished our counter proposal at 7 p.m. The mediator was with us. PAT was texting her at that time, and we then found out that they had left. And when we exited our space, that's when we discovered that the president, Angela Bonilla, was giving an interview downstairs saying that we had not brought a counter proposal to the table, when in fact they had walked away before they read our proposal at all. I appreciate the question and the ability to clarify.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Hannah, I'm going to ask, there are a number of questions here about contingency, so I'm going to maybe open these up to you. Will PIL after school sports continue if there is a strike?
PIL athletic contests and practices that are varsity athletics will continue. And that will be the same if we actually venture into winter sports, winter tryouts as well.
What about PTA events that are held at school after hours or on the weekends? Will they be canceled during the strike, or will they still be happening if a CUP permit is in place?
So many of these events do require a civic use of buildings permit. That's the CUB permit that was referenced. In the event of a strike, the CUB permits for indoor events will be canceled each day, similar to what we do for inclement weather. However, permits for fields and playgrounds will not be canceled, but there will not be building access allowed for the outdoor CUB permits that continue.
Thank you. So, our seniors, it's an important year for them. We have a question in here about how are seniors and students in AP in particular being supported if there is a strike?
Great question. There are a variety of resources that our Office of Teaching and Learning and our college and career readiness teams have put together that include both supplemental educational resources, such as on-demand tutoring, drop-in office hours with staff members, and also some additional supports if indeed it does begin to impact any of the college application processes. So more to come on that, and those resources will be available on our website.
And what about childcare? What options are going to be available to parents if there is a strike? Dr. Adams, I think maybe this.
Sorry, that one's for me. Sorry about that. Thank you for the question, Jonathan. Unfortunately, full-day childcare or student supervision in our schools won't be available during the strike, as our buildings will be closed. Limited space may be available, however, through community-based organizations. For example, we know that Portland Parks and Recreation has a variety of programs and activities that families can participate in at a discounted rate with their Access Pass. As well, there are free drop-in activities for youth ages 10 through 20 years old through the Teen Force Pass. All of this information can be found on our family resource webpage, which is linked below. Again, pps.net/strike resources, all one word. And we'll continue to update that as we learn more.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Sharon, there's a couple of questions in here. Oh my goodness, I just lost them. Where did they go? About how this would affect students, or how would this affect graduation for students, and will you extend the school year?
Sure, that's a very important question. We are and will be paying very close attention to how our seniors will be impacted. At this point, we're just simply unsure of the complete impact on graduation, and so the answers will depend on a number of factors. That will include the length of the strike, which is unknown, and state requirements on student instruction minutes and graduation requirements. Once our negotiations are complete, and we will end this with a tentative agreement with our teachers. So once those negotiations are complete and a date has been selected to resume school, the district will provide students and families with any information regarding any impacts on graduation ceremonies.
Thank you. What about SPED services? Will we make up for the loss of time services provided with students in IEPs?
Great question. So in the event of a strike, a student's IEP team will need to determine whether compensatory education services are appropriate for the students who are eligible for special education services. Those teams would meet and discuss how the number of days of school missed during the strike affected the student's skills, and if deemed appropriate, what amount and type of compensatory services would best address the student's disability-related needs.
And will there be anyone in the district office available to support families during a possible strike?
Absolutely. Our staff will be here and will be ready to address questions that come up, be able to talk with families and support any questions that they may have. And we're here to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Adams, I'm going to go back to some questions regarding bargaining and that we're getting from folks. Do you value what teachers are saying about classroom conditions, especially currently? This person notes that they have a teacher friend that says it's harder than ever.
Yes, let me first state that as a special educator, I know what our educators are saying when they say it's hard. I've done that hard work. I've also been a special education aide and a paraeducator. So I do value and hear their input. And we want things to be better for our teachers. And the reality is we're working within a fixed amount of revenue. If we had unlimited revenue and unlimited resources, I would be the first standing up to say, give our teachers the world. Because we don't, we have to do what's fiscally feasible and sustainable. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. And I'm going to keep it with you. So, you know, there was a slide where I mentioned that 54% that a CSI, TSI schools get 54% more than non-designated CSI school, non-designated schools. So what do these extra dollars go to? FTE? Is it PD days? What is it specifically?
It's typically been a variety of staff, including instructional specialists and other support staff in the building that help our educators. Sometimes it's actually additional educators based on student enrollment.
And you mentioned earlier, I think maybe it was my slide, that the class size average is about 23. Class size at 3 out of 4 school classrooms are at 25 or less. So why are there schools that have 30 or 31 students in all of their classrooms throughout the school?
Well, we've made a conscious decision to funnel resources to our schools that are most in need, and that has created what we have done because of that is we've created a differential equity-based staffing model that drives more resources into the neediest schools. The average is the average, as I mentioned. That's not everyone's experience. We know there are some classrooms with 30 students, and we would love the ability to have the resources to drive those class size numbers down.
And then why does PPS say we have more teachers when we've cut positions in the last few years? Sharon?
Sure. When we look over the course of, when we look at pre-pandemic conditions, we had fewer teachers, fewer PAT educators. So PAT includes classroom educators, it includes counselors, social workers, school psychologists. We have made significant investments in those mental, social, emotional supports, in addition to including our classroom educators. We've had one-time funding through the pandemic the last 2 years to be able to fund additional positions as that money goes away, as the pandemic recedes as well. Though we can no longer rely on those one-time funds. But if you look at what were our class sizes, what are our sources of support pre-pandemic, we have better class sizes now, and we have more educators in the PAT bargaining unit than we did before.
Thank you. Myung, I'm going to ask a question here from Sean. If your general fund balance is 99 million and exceeds your minimum balance, why not spend that on teachers? What are you reserving that for instead?
Right. Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you, Sean. This is a really important question. I appreciate a chance to speak to it. So it is true that in this current year, this current fiscal year or school year, 23-24, the adopted budget that the Board of Education passed back in June does begin with a general general fund balance of over $90 million. But it's really important to clarify that the budget already assumes that more will be spent this year than will be taken in. And that difference is more than $50 million. So although the beginning balance or the starting point is over 90 million, the budget assumes that more than 50 million of that one-time balance will already be drawn down. So leaving a balance somewhere in the low $40 million range. That's what's called in budgetary terms, a structural deficit. And with one-time money, which is really helpful to have, you really have to be careful about only spending it in sustainable ways. Because if you just doing the arithmetic, if you do that 2 years, you're out of the money. You've drawn down a $90+ million fund balance to zero, and that won't work for very long. And in the meantime, the Board of Education has passed a policy that calls for the district's reserves to remain at a minimum at 5% of total resources in a year, and that's about that low $40 million range. So another way of saying this, and Dr. Adams, I've heard you speak to this in shorthand. You don't want to take one-time money and take on additional housing costs, for example, like rent costs. You don't want to take on a bigger rent with one-time savings, because then you're going to run out of the beginning balance that you started with. So that's really it in a nutshell. It's just the difference between one-time money, a structural deficit, and running out of that one-time money.
Thank you. So there's a question, Myung, since you were off mute, here from Eric. If PPS gave all of PAT's demands in a year, when PPS needs to find massive cuts, would teachers need to be laid off? And would it be the young teachers first? So I assume the first year teachers or early teachers that have just started their profession.
Well, it's a big question. So let me try to summarize my understanding. And there are a lot of details. This is not a simple undertaking, but depending on how large the shortfall is, Dr. Adams highlighted a couple of numbers in one of the slides in the presentation, showing the difference between the size of the shortfall under the district's proposal, under PPS's proposal versus PAT's proposals. That's a really big disparity. But whatever the size of the shortfall is, the task would be to look at the district's budget, line by line, look at all the different components of it, and look for ways to make reductions, unless the pie gets bigger, as we've mentioned too. But unless the pie gets bigger, to make reductions in a way that keeps the most essential services intact, insulates our students and our classrooms as much as possible. That said, with some of the size of the deficits and the shortfalls that we're talking about, there really wouldn't be a way to completely keep the impact away from schools, classrooms, and student impact. Just keeping in mind that 90% of the district's budget is spent on people. And most of the people work in schools. And so if you think about the magnitude of the gaps and the cuts that we're talking about, we really would need to look at reducing positions, whether that could be reducing vacant positions, or how many positions would be vacant, how many versus how many positions would be filled, and sort of area by area. What is the nature of the reduction in the positions that we'd be talking about? You'd have to look, sort of more specifically. It's not like you take every single teacher or every single employee in the district, and the least senior individuals would be the first to go. But all of those seniority rules would also be adhered to per the contract and state law.
Thank you, Myung. Superintendent, there's a couple questions again, similar to what I asked earlier here. What has the district done to address overall lack of funding at the state level, knowing that prevents it from offering the pay increases that teachers deserve? I think that was the same question I asked you earlier, but there's another one here. So what can be done to get PPS more money? Is it that elected officials need to hear that schools and teachers funding is a priority?
Well, it's always appreciated when the broader community advocates for Oregon State legislators to support public education. I think what you're hearing over and over in our responses is that we're facing a structural deficit, a structural gap, and it's requiring us to make really difficult choices. Our priority is going to continue to make sure we preserve as much of the school experience for our students, particularly those things that engage them, that provide a well-rounded education. But we can't provide that quality model of education unless the level of funding from our state affords us the ability to do that. I do think that it's going to take some pretty active advocacy by all of us to make sure that our elected officials understand the importance of making sure that public education is funded adequately. I can assure you Portland Public Schools is not the only one finding itself in some predictable financial straits by not being able to meet their obligations. I think you've heard us say over and over again, you've seen the illustrations. Operating costs are greater than the increases that schools in Oregon have received proportionately. So we count on everyone's voice making this clear. This is an issue of priorities. We do hope that our state leaders are listening. We appreciate the opportunities they've provided for us to sort of describe the impacts of the current level of state school funding. We've appreciated the increases that have occurred over the years. They're just not keeping pace with the cost of operating schools. So we do encourage our legislators to look under the sofa cushions, dig a little deeper, and see what they can do to keep the students in Oregon receiving the best possible education.
Thank you. Dr. Adams, I'm going to go back to you, the questions around bargaining. And I'm going to read this question. I think it's alluding to some of the proposals that PAT has offered. Do you truly believe that classroom temperatures above 90 and below 60 are acceptable?
Well, thank you for the question. What I would say is there are optimal temperatures for learning. When it is too hot or too cold, that makes it hard to learn. I worked in buildings that did not have central air in a southern state where it got really, really hot, and I know what that's like. At the same time, I think we have to recognize that we have some buildings that are celebrating their 100th anniversary, and that means our inventory of buildings is older, and that the way to improve that is through our capital bond program, which the voters have been very supportive of approving our ability to either build new schools or renovate and retrofit older buildings.
Thank you. And we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna try to get through all these questions that are left here. Hannah, why is childcare being canceled?
A great question, Jonathan. We recognize the impact that a potential strike would have on our families, and how important it is for students to have a safe place to be, both at school and after school or before school. But there are great concerns around having our students in buildings where educators may be outside picketing. And we want to ensure that our students feel safe and are not in a place where they need to cross a picket line. And so we're trying to be very conscientious. There are some tough decisions that our team has to make as we are looking ahead. And the time to make those tough decisions is unfortunately upon us. And so at this point, the decision has been made that any external partner within our buildings will not have access to the building, will not be operating within the building due to safety reasons.
Great. Sharon, maybe either if you can't answer it, I'll maybe turn it over to Myung, but why did central office spending go up 38% while decreasing student-facing instructors by -4%?
Jonathan, in your question, you said, why did central office spending go up by 38%? Is that what you stated?
Correct. And I'm reading a question directly from our audience. So if those numbers are not accurate, feel free to.
Sure. Those numbers, and I will rely on Myung to correct me if I get anything wrong here, but our central office spending has not gone up 38%. We have seen an increase in our budget by 18% when our revenue has only gone up 9.1%. But where we have spent that money has been in our schools, right? While we've had almost 8% decline in student enrollment, we have had a 16% increase in how we have spent money on our staff closest to the schools, including our PAT educators, and a 5.5% increase in PAT FTE. So those numbers that you quoted are not accurate. And I look to Myung if he can provide more context for that. I think what's important to understand is we don't see a path to how do we cut spending in the central office alone, which accounts for such a small percentage of our operating budget, to breach the gap between our proposal and PAT's proposal.
The only thing I would add, Sharon, is that I'm not sure about this, if this is underlying the question, but there was a number of weeks recently that there was some inaccurate information floating around in our community that unfortunately stemmed from some data that had been inadvertently misreported on the Oregon Department of Education's website. There was some coding issues about historical financial information that was really unfortunate that it was misreported and it was really out there in the community, and a lot of the statements that were out there in the community unfortunately were based on a misunderstanding about how much of the district's budget was spent in direct classroom versus centrally or in other functions. And that's now been corrected. That's the good news. The information has been corrected on ODE's website, and our understanding is that information that was wrong is not being circulated actively to the extent it was before. But that did get a lot of attention for about a month or so. So I wonder if that might be part of what's underlying the question. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Myung. So we are at 6:30. I do want to have Sharon answer 3 questions, maybe 2. There's 2 separate topics, but I want to make sure. The first one is, are there more teachers wanting to work at PPS for the salary offered? I know that many teachers and SPED staff are leaving for other districts, and many positions are unfilled here. Similar, what are you doing to attract more teachers to the district? There are multiple unstaffed teacher positions at my son's school.
Well, part of our proposal addresses what are the salaries for our teachers, right? So you heard earlier in the presentation how it is important for us that we have among the highest paid teachers in the state. We have particularly focused on our minimum salary for teachers, so the starting salary for teachers, increasing that, trying to make that a more livable and attractive wage. You'll also see in our proposal, and Dr. Adams spoke to this earlier, early hiring. So currently, we have a set of processes that we commit to in our current language in our contract that makes PPS go to post positions every school year. 6 weeks to 2 months later than our districts nearby that we compete with for positions. So we are trying to address the timing of that. We have offered a stipend to our SPED educators as well. That's an area that is difficult to hire. I would also identify that we have made investments in other bargaining units as well to help with the challenges in filling vacancies and having competitive living wages across all of our bargaining units.
Great. And Sharon, I think you spoke to this earlier. So just to clarify what if we heard correctly, at this time, no one knows if the school year will be extended if teachers go on strike.
We have to work through a plan regarding makeup days. That is something that we would do with our educators union, and it will depend in large part on things that we just don't know yet, like what is the length of the strike, if we go into strike at all, etc.
That's unknown yet.
It is at this point unknown, but we recognize that is a concern, and of course we have requirements by the state and expectations for our student experience and learning targets that will underlie those sets of decisions when we're there.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening, this afternoon. I hope this event gave you information that you didn't know. Please visit pps.net/strike resources to learn more about what we're doing in the event of a strike. You can also visit pps.net/bargaining, and that will give you the latest at the bargaining table. Superintendent, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick goodbye, and we'll call it a day.
I also want to thank our audience for joining us today. I hope it helped provide some clarity about where we are as a school system. I want to thank members of the senior leadership team here who made themselves available to answer all of your questions this evening. I want to encourage everybody to stay informed, stay involved, continue to forward your questions, and more than anything, help us all stay in a constructive conversation, a productive one at the table. We're hoping that we arrive at a fair settlement that honors our educators and protects our students' experience. We want to keep Portland Public Schools strong. We are the district we want everyone to be proud of. So thank you to everybody out there.
Thank you.